7, 6, 5. Good afternoon. I'm Jake Ward. I'm the president of the Connected Commerce Council. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today on the role of technology to support North Carolina's recovery. Before we get started, I wanted to say thank you and welcome to the North Carolina Technology Association, the Greater Durham Chamber of Commerce, and Innovate Raleigh. Before we jump in, let me make a seamless plug. You're going to hear me mention a number of times today a piece of research that the Connected Commerce Council recently released on what we call the digital safety net and its importance for small businesses and the use of digital tools and technologies throughout the pandemic and as we build back toward recovery. For more information about that research or to learn some more about the digital safety net, visit connectedcouncil.org. And now that that's out of the way, we can begin with our programming. Today, we're going to hear from some great panelists on how technology is fueling North Carolina's recovery in the wake of the COVID pandemic. We're going to discuss the importance of digital tools, their use, how access to online marketplaces and digital services have enabled many small businesses throughout North Carolina to survive through very difficult months over the past year. But before we get into those discussions, I'd like to welcome the Mayor of Raleigh, Mary-Ann Baldwin, to say a few words and set the context for today's discussion. Madam Mayor.
Thank you so much for having me today. Good afternoon, everyone. North Carolina's small business community, when I think about the past year, they've demonstrated a remarkable level of resiliency. Let's face it, look at what they've had to deal with. Quarantine procedures, social distancing practices, sanitation mandates, curfews. Even with these unprecedented challenges, many small businesses have adapted, and I think you'll hear about some of that today. Here in Raleigh, our team's been focused on sustaining community growth and economic development, even during these challenging times. And supporting the small business community is my number one priority. As we navigate the challenges of the past year, we have recognized the value that technology has delivered at all levels of our economy. From small business owners leveraging digital tools to sustain their operations, to the investments and commitments that technology companies have made here. And I'll give you a great example. The city of Raleigh stood up a small business fund. We put in $1 million and we raised $600,000 from our corporate community. A lot of that money came from financial services, banks, but it also came from our technology companies who want to see our small business community thrive. So I've mentioned some of the things, but of course, where would we be without Zoom? So when March 13th hit, and we were told to stay at home, no one knew we'd still be working from home a year later. We watched as brick and mortar shops shuttered and in-person events were canceled. But it was truly inspiring for me to see business owners tackle these challenges head on using the technology tools available to them. They updated their operating models by staying in touch with customers over social media and other online platforms. They communicated with employees over video conferencing platforms. And they did simple things like updating information about their hours, outdoor seating options, and social distancing requirements online. So operating online became a significant benefit. What I loved was watching the way our restaurants pivoted. John at Jay Betsky's, he started offering heat and eat creations right out of the gate. And he advertised these new menus on Instagram and Facebook with these beautiful pictures of the food he was creating. Molino's used its expansive outdoor space to attract customers and help them feel safe. And they did that in such a way where they promoted what they were doing, again, online and through customer email. Gonza Tequila and Tacos, they took over parking spaces in their lot and created a fun and inspirational space for their clients who could make online reservations. Chidi and Paul at Garland offered heat and eat takeout complete with a link to a video where you could watch Chidi prepare the meal. And they also offered a Spotify playlist. That was pretty fun. And Bittersweet built probably the loveliest parklet in downtown where they could safely serve their guests. And they also reinvented themselves using online ordering. So as you see, digital tools and online services have been instrumental in keeping businesses connected with their customers and ultimately helping them keep their lights on and their employees on the payroll. That said, I recognize that the role of technology in supporting Raleigh's economy and our state economy extends beyond the small business community. Raleigh has become a model, I'm happy to say, for innovation and entrepreneurship, attracting young and skilled talent at a tremendous rate. All you have to do too is look at the companies that are growing up here. Red Hat, Citrix, Pendo, not to mention stalwarts like SAS and Cree. But there's more. The Triangle area also probably remains home to some of the nation's leading academic institutions, another attraction that results in continued investment from the tech sector who want to see us build this 21st century economy. You know, before COVID hit us head on, I'd asked our economic development team if they could set up a meeting with David Morgan. He's the CEO of Bandwidth. I wanted to convince David that Bandwidth needed to choose Raleigh as its future headquarters. And look what's happened. Bandwidth will be located near PNC Arena and Umstead Park. They'll be creating a beautiful new campus. They're growing internationally with a critical corporate acquisition, and they plan to hire 1,200 workers. This is an example of what our future can be. Government at the municipal, state, and federal level will continue to play a significant role in supporting the small business community as they build back after the pandemic. But we should also give credit where credit is due. Small businesses in North Carolina have been dexterous in navigating this new normal with a little bit of help from technology. I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation today about the resiliency so evident throughout the state's small business community and the importance of welcoming continued investments from the technology sector. As the economic contraction brought by the pandemic remains a challenge and will remain a challenge for months to come, we have to plan to leave the welcome mat out for key technology stakeholders that have supported our community. And even though Google didn't choose Raleigh for its new expansion, they did choose our neighbor Durham. I couldn't be happier that they could see the benefits that our region offers. Thank you, and back to you, Jake.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Do you have a few minutes to answer a couple questions?
If they're not too difficult.
I think you'll find them easy enough. You mentioned the sort of the role of local government, of state government to help support small businesses as they recover. You know, I don't think there's any question that the intersection of technology and small businesses throughout the pandemic was headline news all the time. The role of government in enforcing those protocols and helping people think through their next steps has never been more apparent. What are some of the things that leaders like yourself can do to help, whether they be restaurant service providers or Raleigh-based businesses, build back stronger than ever?
Well, I mentioned, Jake, that we had started a small business fund. And this was at a time when we were going to experience a $28 million deficit ourselves. And we did not receive stimulus funding, but we are supposed to receive stimulus funding this go around. And one of my top priorities is finding ways to use some of that funding to support our small business community. I mean, there are some other ways we can do that as well. We started using our public spaces differently. I mean, let's face it, when you go downtown and you see a parklet out there or people sitting outside in umbrellas and whatnot, that just creates a much more lively street scene than seeing cars parked and, sidewalks underutilized. So we're really looking at ways to allow businesses to continue to use our public spaces in new ways. If I have my way, we will set up another fund to help our small businesses, help them continue to expand, grow in different ways, and do things differently. Technology, spending more on technology, how can that help them? What are their needs? We'll be looking at all of that. But another way to do that is to really support our entrepreneurial community and support the new ideas, the innovation that young companies are bringing and helping them grow our economy.
One of the findings from our research that I mentioned in my opening remarks is that that the primary barrier to entry for small businesses' use of digital tools and services, which we know is a bit of a silver bullet, right? They produce higher profit, more sustainability, they hire more staff, and in instances like the pandemic, they've been more agile. One of those silver bullets is lowering the barrier to entry for education, which can be done, we think, at a municipal and state level through programs look and feel sort of like job fairs, but are more education programs for Intuit or Google AdWords, Facebook advertising. It's one of the things that we'd be more than happy to work with you and your team to think through using those public spaces, using this new opportunity, and trying to lower that barrier to entry. One more question, real quick. You had mentioned the investment of Google in Durham, and that's close enough. Raleigh would have been better, I think. But I wonder if you would speak about other things that you as mayor can do to attract more talent, more opportunities, more tech companies to the Triangle.
So we have to invest in our community. People want to live in great places. And so making investments in our parks, in our greenways, making investments in things that matter to people, I think that's a really important step, maintaining our quality of life. The other thing is working with our universities to continue to create that talent pool. I'm also a big proponent of workforce development. We have many people in our city who need job training, especially now after the hospitality industry had the hit that it did. They're looking for new opportunities. So how can we train them for some of the jobs of the future? I think those are three big deals right now. And then also, how can we work with our university system, Wake Tech as well, some of our smaller universities such as William Peace and Meredith, to really reinvent themselves so they are better suited to help train some of these future workers. Maybe it's certificate work, whatnot, but I think the workforce development piece is key. And the biggest thing of all is we have to be there. We have to provide the leadership and we have to stand up. And, me saying to David Morgan, what can I do to keep you here in Raleigh?
That's great.
That's what we got to do.
That's right. Thank you very much for your time, Mayor. We appreciate it. Feel free to hang around as we welcome in our first panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then we'll seamlessly transition over. David Meeker from Trophy Brewing, welcome. And then has Stella been able to join us? Let me check this real quick. I think she's hopping on in a few minutes. David, why don't we go ahead and oh, there she is. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Hey, Stella, how are you? David, why don't we go ahead and get started? Tell me a little bit about Trophy Brewing. Tell me about your business.
Sure. So Trophy Brewing has 3 locations in Raleigh. Our original location on Morgan Street, our production brewery on Maywood Avenue, and then we have a downtown location that's closed now and we're renovating. And then under the same parent group, we have a bottle shop and sandwich shop called State of Beer. And we started 12 years ago. The group of us started with a craft beer bar called the Busy Bee Cafe. We opened our first nano brewery in 2012. And then grew to a microbrewery with our production brewery now in 2015. So that's sort of our story, and we're really, all of our locations are very close to downtown, and that's where our heart is.
And how about you, Stella? Welcome to the call. Can you tell us a little bit about SJ Adams Consulting? You're on mute, Stella. And I think frozen.
SJ Adams Consulting is a civil rights boutique investigatory and research firm. We do fair housing, fair lending, and we do fair housing, fair lending, investigations, predatory lending investigations, but we also do research around small business and small business access to capital and credit. And we do research in communities around equity and inclusion. So we have a broad spectrum of things that we do. And we serve primarily a nationwide audience, but now that I'm home and
Oh, you froze there for a moment, Stella. Why don't I jump right in and ask you guys sort of the most relevant question to our audience today. How's your year going? It's been a very difficult 12 months for every small business, particularly small businesses in the service industry, hospitality, trying to pivot your business to be online, to fill inventory, to reach new audiences. David, can you tell us a little bit about what that challenge has been like and some of the things that you've done to meet the demands of this new normal?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm in the brewery and restaurant business. And I mean, it's been an ugly year, let's be honest. And we've had to pivot a lot, and it's still, the burn rate is pretty ugly. With PPP money that is eased, but at some point that runs out and you really got to be able to function on your own. A quick picture of what we've done. The spring and early summer last year was really bad, and I won't go into those numbers, but end of summer, fall, and this spring, we leveled out about 60% of our previous sales. About half those sales came from online orders. So when we were basically doing no online orders before.
Right.
The reason we were doing none before is we knew how to make money on selling you a beer on site. So we knew the margins on that, and we could make money doing that. And anything we could do to get you there to have a beer on site was what we were doing. So our social media, our website, it was all based on getting you there in person. Well, that clearly wasn't going to work in a pandemic. So we had to pivot to online ordering, where people could pick up food to go, pick up beer to go, and make reservations online for distance tables. And it was a huge transition for us, but it's clearly a new revenue model for us that I hope stays long after. And there's big potential. Just in those numbers I told you, we did 60% of our previous sales. Half of those were online orders. If we ever get to 100% of the on-site sales again and keep these online to-go orders going, you can imagine us being at potentially 130%. They won't play out that way because some of the customers are the same. But it was a big transition for us that never would have happened without the pandemic, because we never would have spent the time, and our POS provider never would have made the technology as good as they made it unless the pandemic happened. So I hope it's a really nice silver lining of this time.
One of the things that we found in our research and working with our members, David, is that though this kind of necessity is never optimal, right? This is a tragic instance. It's done a lot of damage to people's lives, to our communities, to the economy, certainly. It has sped up the learning curve for small businesses and created the forcing mechanism around the digital transformation that will ultimately make our business models more sustainable, right? We don't want to live online. I'd much rather be doing this in person, but
I would too.
it does enable us to build some versatility into our models. And yes, you're probably not going to capture
Absolutely.
30% growth, but if you captured 5% year-on-year growth, that'd be great, right? And if you're able to meet a market that previously wasn't accessible to you because now you have digital advertising or more targeted Instagram posts, and that you can get to that next level of consumers, that's a lesson hard learned, but well worth it.
Yeah.
Stella, what are you seeing from the research that you're doing and the people that you're working with in terms of sort of the immediate effects of the pandemic, the secondary and third effects on businesses, on equity, on the way people are going about doing their work?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of interesting trends. One, I had thought that my business as on its own would just drizzle away because I was on the road 60% of the time doing research in various cities across the country and making presentations and doing training. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. But in June, the city of Boston asked me to do some analysis for them and report it online. And I did. And once that happened, other people were like, oh, we can have Stella. She's like online. And so I would say after June, I saw my business recover pretty much. As I went from, and in some aspects grow a little bit because I didn't lose travel time.
Right.
I could kind of back to back do trainings and workshops and analysis. But what I did find is that that businesses' ability to participate in the recovery through PPP or EIDL grants and loans was disproportionate. Part of the research that my team did found and uncovered that PPP loans information was not being given to women, and particularly African American women, in the same way and the same manner that they were given to male businessmen. So there was some of our assumptions were that we were going to see a racial difference. We did not anticipate that we were going to see the significant gender difference in information and access to PPP loans and EIDL loans. So that was a big surprise that has come out of this. And we hope much of that has been corrected during this additional process.
So I wonder, I'm sorry, I wonder if you're seeing the same thing that we are, which is that yes, gender, yes, racial inequity, no question about the distribution, sort of the channels, the infrastructure wasn't in place for the disbursement of information, let alone money, but that there was also sort of an inequitable distribution of funds based on the size of businesses. Micro businesses, smaller, even sole proprietor businesses were largely cut of the first two waves of PPP, got small pieces of the third wave, and maybe likely going to get a significant chunk of what's left through the May extension. But that, those sole proprietorships are often, many of them are women owned. There are a number of service industries that are driven by sole proprietors that were completely shut out of that process, which came with some serious ramifications financially. And we share your hope, but also your optimism that if we can narrow that down a bit through the administration and the disbursement of this last chunk of money, or maybe even another extension on top of it, we can get resources to those businesses sort of just in time to stem the tide. What are your thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, for many businesses, they're gone.
Yeah.
They're not coming back. Women-owned businesses and African-American businesses are, we've seen a 40% gone the ramifications of that, when you think about a sole proprietor, is that's not just a business, that's income for paying rent, paying bills. And so that's kind of on the downside of what we're seeing. The other thing we're seeing is we're seeing that lenders have very little interest in micro. Yep. And let's be honest about it. Some of these businesses are nano businesses. Okay, it may not be $50,000 in gross income, may not be gross business, may not be the appeal to you. But if you're a single woman and this is your livelihood, and it pays your bills, that's like a $35,000 job, right?
Yep. And
so there's very little interest in making these nano loans. The CDFI community is just not big enough to handle it. The real need, they're not equally dispersed around the community. And so we have to think about how can cities and counties set up nano loan pools that help people in their communities reach those goals, right? That's actually a really good loan for a city or a county to make, is a $50,000 or $60,000 loan that's going to keep a business in place, that's going to generate taxes and revenues into the future. So those nano loans we need to be thinking about how government locally and statewide can support those. And then we need to think about how do we get distribution to micro loans that are at $50,000 to $150,000. And let's not forget that when we're talking about small business loans, 94% of the businesses have 2 or fewer employees. That's all small. This is all business. Okay, 94% are small businesses, and 94% are small businesses with under $1 million in revenue. And so, when we talk about small business, let's talk about who we're really talking about. A $10 million business is not a small business if you go by what percentage of the market that they play. I digress a little bit, but I think it's really important that we understand and we name it, right? A small business is a business with receipts between $2 million and $1 million. Micro business is under $1 million. A nano business is under 100,000. Let's just keep it into the reality of what people actually earn, not the imaginary small business out there that we have an imaginary business out there that is not the reality of the small mom and pop businesses that run America. 50% of all jobs are generated by these mom and pop businesses. 50% of all jobs. So when we're talking about creating jobs, we're talking about sustaining and growing small business enterprises. Getting that beer in my hand, David. Getting me that beer in my hand.
Stella, for what it's worth, we've had some success linking up Connected Commerce Council members with non-banks that are doing PPP loans for much smaller companies. Companies like A10, it's an Idaho-based distributor for sole proprietors primarily, and that in this last wave, the 3C is focused on connecting small businesses with that money. Frankly, it's theirs. They should have access to it. So we'll get to that. We've only got a couple more minutes, so let me ask this sort of as an open-ended question. David, you alluded to, you hope that this growth maintains. It sounds like you've made some decisions about the software that you use, the point of sale systems that are in place. My question is, what do you see as the next 6, 9, 12 months as what we imagine is pent up demand explodes in Raleigh? What are we going to see? What are you going to do? What's your plan for the next little bit?
Yeah. So 2 thoughts. First one, something we're doing right now. Like as we're getting more confident, as the weather improves and the vaccine rollout continues to go well, we're investing heavily in our website. We're getting a new website done, spending a good amount of money for us. It seems obvious. We're a brewery, restaurant group. We should have a great website, but good websites can be expensive, and we just hadn't spent the money before. So that's sort of a first step in the next 60, 75 days. We're saying, hey, a lot of revenue is coming from our website. It needs to be great, and it needs to lead people to places where they can buy things. The second thing is a much broader thing, and we're going to stay focused on or stay aware of what the next pivot is. And we tried 8 or 10 things during this pandemic, and 2 or 3 of them have really worked. The others failed, and we gave up pretty quickly. But the 2 or 3 that worked, are gonna stick with us and be with us long after this pandemic's over. And they're just really game changers for our business long term. So we're gonna stay focused on what's the next thing that we need to pivot to continue to grow and not be as stagnant or as plateaued as we were before.
Bella, what advice do you have? What thoughts do you have on that question?
Yeah, for me, the expansion of broadband has got to be is critical. And I was in the middle of making a presentation, and all of my broadband access Wi-Fi died right in the middle of this major presentation. And I said, oh, and that day I went out and bought my own system so that it wouldn't happen again. I have been using a lot of tech tools. I have developed a learning management system. I have my own platform for doing workshops and training. I have a number of things that I would not have invested in if it had not been for the pandemic. I think we want to make sure that we have strong technology is critical to new businesses. It's critical to small businesses. We need to make sure it's affordable and accessible, and that we are lucky, and we just need to understand that here in the Triangle, that we have some of the greatest tech tools and tech companies at our disposal. Programs like this expose us to them and give us new ideas on how we can work together to generate business and support each other.
Wonderful. Thank you both for your time, for your experience and your expertise. Good luck. Be safe. Be well. Great. Let's go ahead and transition this panel to our next discussion about how technology and public policy sort of intersect with economic development, or in this instance, economic recovery. I'm going to welcome in our next panelists. Michelle Calton from North Carolina, there you are, North Carolina Tech Association. Bridget Harrington from Innovate Raleigh. Bridget is right there, wonderful. And then Brian Fox from the Greater Durham Chamber of Commerce. Hey, Brian. Welcome, guys. Thank you. I'm sure most of our audience is familiar with your organizations, but can we go around the horn real quick and just do 30 seconds on, let's start with the Chamber, Brian?
Yeah, sure. Good to see everyone. And I'll just, in the spirit of co-opetition that you've already heard helps define our state and region, say I'm happy to be part of the most significant event happening in the Research Triangle right now. On behalf of the innovative, diverse, collaborative, and inclusive entrepreneurs and organizations that make up the Durham Chamber and North Carolina business community, like Ms. Adams and Mr. Meeker, it's an honor to be joining leaders and partners like we've already heard from today. The Durham Chamber is part of the regional economic development community that has helped build a local ecosystem, including the exciting Google announcement that Mayor Baldwin so graciously referenced. However, as y'all talked about, public policy also plays a critical role, and Ms. Adams was exactly right that many businesses are suffering right now. However, we're also seeing acceleration of startup trends and have the opportunity to provide support there. So looking forward to talking more about what we can do together.
Wonderful. Michelle?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having NC Tech participate. We are the lead organization in the state for technology-based businesses and technology-enabled businesses, emerging tech companies. We've been around for nearly 30 years, and our mission is to fuel the growth of tech-based businesses and foster innovation in the state. We have about 600 member organizations from the mountains to the coast. All the big brand tech companies that come to mind, and even companies with 1 or 2 employees that are just starting out. So a very wide, diverse range of technology companies, and then also big businesses that are here in North Carolina and growing in North Carolina because of the infrastructure in place and the talent, and so they come here to grow their technology and innovation teams here. We focus on government affairs at the state level primarily. We work on talent development because talent is a major issue for our companies, and their ability to grow is to find qualified talent. A piece of that has to do with diversity and inclusion in tech as well. So last week we just had our Diversity and Inclusion in Tech Summit, our 2nd annual. So that's a big piece of the talent focus. We do a lot around industry promotion in the state. We release a state tech industry report to show how North Carolina is doing in a whole wide range of indicators, and then how we measure up to other states. We produce an IT job trends report on a monthly basis to show how many open IT positions there are in the state of North Carolina. And then we also do a lot of events. So we're almost like the chamber for the tech industry and the tech sector.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. Bridget?
Hey guys, thank you for having me on here. Such a jam-packed hour of just amazing folks. I'm so grateful and honored to be a part of this. So Innovate Raleigh is an organization that was formed, created by Mayor Baldwin about 8 or 9 years ago to foster innovation and entrepreneurship in our region. And the mission of the organization is to make our region a top center for entrepreneurship and innovation in the nation. And the way that we do this, Mayor Baldwin sort of set the tone of and operationalized how we go about things, is that we bring together various members of the community, business leaders, small business owners, academics, government leaders, put our heads together. We figure out, well, where are the gaps in the ecosystem? What can we do to be, what can we do that if we could fill those gaps would help propel the innovation entrepreneurship community forward? And we get to work on filling those gaps through resources, through programs, all the things, making stuff happen. For those of you who know Mayor Baldwin, she's all about making things happen. And so that's what Innovate Raleigh really is about. It's about being nimble, responding to the ecosystem, and making stuff happen. So about 3 years ago, we formed a partnership with the Raleigh Chamber and Wake County Economic Development. So we support their efforts and they support ours. And really, at the end of the day, we are an economic development organization to really promote and support entrepreneurship. So we work collaboratively with Brian's group and Michelle's group. So that's Innovate Raleigh.
Wonderful. So I have a panel of North Carolina experts here that are going to be able to speak to where we are and where we go from here in a post-pandemic world. So I'm just going to throw out all the questions that we previously discussed. I want to bounce an idea off you guys. So one of the things that we found with the Connected Commerce Council research is the idea of a digital safety net, that there was a direct correlation, even a causation, between the number of tools and services and access points to sort of scalable technology, that if a small business were previously using they were more likely to survive the first few months of the pandemic, even without additional cash, access to cash. And that as those tools increased during the pandemic, their survival rate went up even more. What that meant is if you were digitally empowered, the pandemic hurt, but it probably wasn't fatal. But if you weren't, if you were uncertain of the tools, if you weren't using them to their full capacity, it was a lot like stacking blocks out on the floor as opposed to stacking them vertically. You could survive with a good foundation, but you weren't going to raise the heights of your business. Are you seeing that in your member companies, in your experience with small businesses, particularly? You know, North Carolina is uniquely positioned. You've got sort of big tech and tech providers, the universities, and a robust small business economy throughout the state. I'm wondering if this is a microcosm that largely proves our point, or if you guys have some thoughts on it. We can open it up to anybody.
I can jump in just to say that digital transformation has been a topic that technology companies and technology leaders have been talking for a number of years. And the pandemic also put a number of members and leaders that we work with in a zone to accelerate digital transformation faster than they were already doing so. When you're talking about a distributed workforce and security, all the things that you have to manage through a virtual environment. And so, the technology companies and startup businesses, if they've got some infrastructure in place already and access to tools, means that they've probably encountered some training and have some connections to resources to be resourceful in being able to agilely move to pivot their business model to a virtual capacity. So, we've been having those conversations at a larger level. So I can imagine that companies, startup businesses that didn't have those tools in place were left behind.
Many years ago, Michelle, I took the 7 stages of grief and mapped them on the hype cycle for the digital transformation and said, there it is. This is what is preventing people from actually transforming their business. Is they get to the point where they're past denial, but they're not quite to acceptance, so they just throw their hands up. This was a forcing mechanism for businesses large and small across the economy they had to step into this space and make the adjustments throughout. You used a word just then that actually the mayor used earlier, agility, right? We know small businesses and entrepreneurs are resourceful. We know that they are perseverant and it's just sort of ingrained in entrepreneurialism. But agility is the key in a crisis, whether it be a global pandemic or a hurricane or an economic downturn, right? The ability to pivot and shift your resources, change your supply chain feels critical if you're going to have long-term sustainability. Bridget, Brian, I wonder if you guys have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, one of our board members said early on in the pandemic is that entrepreneurs, it seems kind of harsh, but it stayed with me, maybe because it is so harsh. So the entrepreneurs eat chaos for lunch. Like they're the ones that they find the opportunity in the chaos and consume it, figure out what's next and go for it. And it's been such a foggy, uncertain time. That the people that have, and the companies that have been able to make their way through them have been exactly what you're saying, Jake, in that they already had a firm footing with their technology and they were able to embrace the uncertainty and pivot and be agile and find out how they can come out on top at the end. And there has been so much, and we're talking we're just so generalizing. An earlier panel, Stella's point about nano companies and micro companies, everyone's experiencing this whole thing differently. So this is absolutely a generalization. But at the end of the day, it's been so chaotic and so uncertain that the companies that were able to really understand those tools and harness those tools have really been the ones that have been able to come out on top. So. I think that's what your premise, I think, is absolutely playing out in North Carolina.
Yeah, Stella said something in her very spot on sort of rebuke of the idea of generalizing small businesses and categorizing them appropriately. I've frequently said that the experience of a small business owner is universal, but every decision is unique, right? Every individual experience feels very isolating. The counsel I give anybody who is saying, I want to be a small business owner, I want to start a business, I want to be an entrepreneur, is to get comfortable being incredibly uncomfortable. And that's what this is. You're going to find out what your threshold is for that discomfort. It takes real courage, and it takes sort of the ability to focus and eat chaos for lunch. Brian, I saw that you were about to jump on there.
Well, I was just going to say a lot of great points. The tech industry in the Triangle alone represents $15 billion, 4,000 companies, 60,000 employees, and it's growing. I know across the state that those numbers are mirrored as well. And the thing is, though, that everybody's in the tech business now. There's got to be some way that you're connected, and we're certainly seeing that. Some of the tools that large employers, some of our growing companies and others are offering are really helping get everyone through this pandemic and heading towards what's next through a variety of industries. And we see that multiplier happening, not just from this industry, but in everything it supports.
All right, let me dig in on that a little bit. Raleigh, particularly North Carolina, generally is uniquely positioned to have a tech infrastructure and sort of a foot forward toward innovation for technology companies. Do you have the infrastructure in place that you need to bounce back faster? Do you need more? What does it look like? I'm sure you guys have given this some thought. I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear what my colleagues think as well. But I'll just say that Mayor Baldwin hit on it. There's so much that goes into supporting these industries that all support one another. Workforce development. Eventually, we're going to get back to thinking about transportation issues and other things that all go into supporting all facets of our community. We know that there's a lot of folks working on growing with that intentionality. But it gets back to the great talent and quality of life that we have here. And so we're trying to do everything that we can to continue moving that forward in an equitable way, in a way that really continues to, in the way that we think of it in Durham, not just help people get back on the bull, but get on the bull for the first time if they hadn't had the chance yet.
It's a fun ride. Michelle, do you have some thoughts on that infrastructure? And
yeah, I mean, just in the way that we think about technology, I think through this past year, it's become a lot of folks talk about, essential businesses, and obviously we're, the healthcare workers and those on the front line are essential. But for us to be able to operate over the past year, technology infrastructure has proven itself to be an essential business, because if we didn't have the technology infrastructure, things would really come to a halt. Businesses would not be, still operating, and education wouldn't be able to be delivered. So, I think that this whole year has put that perspective in minds that we've got to have a good and solid technology infrastructure. And I think North Carolina is one of the leading states in the country in having grappled with that over the years and have been very smart in how a foundation has been laid here.
So let me put you guys on the spot a little bit to wrap this up. The numbers that we have from our most recent snippet of research from North Carolina has 87% of North Carolina small businesses increasing their use of digital tools during the crisis, and 85% say that they'll continue to use those tools after the crisis. That probably makes a lot of sense. It's certainly logical. What role do we, the four of us particularly, have to play among state and federal policymakers to ensure continued access to these tools? Right? This is what we used to call the small stack. It's what 3C called the small stack, where you can use Google for email provider and analytics. You can use Facebook advertising to reach a new audience. You use Constant Contact to manage your CRM, and you can build on top of that. Intuit for your back office, et cetera. You basically have an IT department, but it's all off the shelf, scalable enterprise tools designed just for small businesses. If in instances where some of these larger platforms are being investigated by the Department of Justice, where they're being criticized by members of Congress, the math changes on the cost of those tools and or the access points to them. Are you afraid that those numbers, that optimism that comes with access to those tools is going to be negatively affected? You guys can all go quiet if you want. I'll just vamp for a little longer.
I think what's important is that policymakers need to consider a mixture of issues as policies are and regulations are drafted. You know, things like privacy and security and accessibility. This isn't the core business, you know, of all startup companies. They're worrying about growing their business, and so there needs to be protections in place. So it's important to balance the rights and interests of the consumer with the need for innovation and the benefit of technology and to individuals and to organizations across the board.
I agree. Speaking of innovation, Bridget, do you have some thoughts on what role we need government at various levels to play or not?
Yeah, I think it's funny thing, I won't tell you. I think it's, it's really about, we're not so much of a policy organization, so my colleagues will be able to speak more detail than me. But I think about the, as broadband access, and like the more and more that we can have just make it sure it's ubiquitous across our state. This whole experience has really put a fine point on how inequitable broadband access is. And so if I could just put one thing into place to advocate for, it would be that, and that's for both, with online learning to small businesses. We all need to really be able to, this is a utility now, and so we need to be able to make sure we all have access.
Absolutely. And you may have heard me mention to the mayor earlier that one of our findings is that lowering the barrier to entry of education for those uncertain small businesses can be sort of a springboard for recovery, for profit, for sustainability and growth. And so one of the ways that public-private partnerships can work on this is to hold events, to do online training, to do webinars like this about unpacking Intuit's QuickBooks tools, right? Because if you can manage your supply and your supply chain as well as your AR and accounts payable, then you're in a better position to run your business, particularly when crisis strikes. And so that's one of the ways I think that we can help be supportive from a access standpoint. Brian, did you have any thoughts on where we stand today?
Yeah, last piece would just be that those digital tools and online platforms are more affordable and accessible than ever, and they are allowing businesses to quickly adapt and meet challenges head on. So our political leadership can and should embrace the role that technology platforms are actively playing in supporting the small business community and the whole business community. These tools reach a global customer base, they operate efficiently, and they keep employees on the payroll. So do depend on a pro-tech posture, and appreciate all the good things that so many partners are working on together to push this forward.
Wonderful. Well said. Well, it is exactly 4:55. We hit it right on the number. Thank you all for your expertise, for your answers, for your participation today. Thank you to our audience for joining us. This will also be recorded and shipped out so that people can dip back in later. Everybody be safe, be well. Continue to do good work on behalf of your member companies, and it's almost over. We just need to hang in there a little bit longer. Thank you, everybody.